Some people think respect belongs only to the rich, until one quiet moment proves them wrong. The Romano family estate glittered beneath thousands of warm golden lights as luxury sedans rolled through the circular driveway and valets hurried from one arrival to the next. Inside the sprawling mansion, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while a string quartet filled the ballroom with elegant music that floated above hundreds of quiet conversations. Business executives, local politicians, international investors, and longtime family allies gathered for the annual private banquet hosted by Ethan Kang, the young Korean Mafia boss whose reputation for discipline and influence stretched far beyond the city. Every guest wore expensive tailored suits or evening gowns, every smile carried hidden calculation, and every handshake hinted at alliances that reached deeper than ordinary business. Among the dozens of household employees moving silently between tables was Maya Brooks, a 26-year-old black maid whose perfectly pressed uniform blended into the background as naturally as the white tablecloths and polished silver. She carried a serving tray with steady hands, quietly refilled crystal glasses, and answered every request with calm professionalism that rarely earned so much as a thank you. To most people in the ballroom, she was simply another employee whose name was never worth learning. A woman wrapped in designer jewelry glanced toward Maya with a dismissive smile before whispering loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "I suppose every grand estate needs someone to clear the dishes." A businessman beside her chuckled before adding, "Just make sure she doesn't touch the vintage wine before the important people do." Several guests laughed softly, careful not to appear openly rude while making no effort to hide their amusement. Another man casually remarked that uniforms made everyone look the same anyway, especially the help. Maya heard every word. She heard the laughter, the quiet assumptions, and the effortless way strangers judged her before she had spoken a single sentence. Yet her expression never changed. She simply thanked another guest for handing her an empty glass, adjusted the silver tray resting comfortably against her arm, and continued walking with the same measured pace she had practiced for years. She had long ago learned that dignity often revealed itself through patience rather than argument. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed several guests exchanging amused looks in Maya's direction. His eyes lingered for only a moment before returning to the entrance hall where security staff quietly adjusted their earpieces and checked every detail for the evening's most anticipated arrival. Tonight was different from every previous banquet. His father, Chairman Daniel Kang, had finally agreed to travel from South Korea after years away from public family gatherings. Even people who had negotiated billion-dollar deals admitted they felt nervous whenever the older man entered a room. Every employee had received detailed instructions. Every executive had rehearsed the proper greeting. Every member of the household understood that one small mistake could become the story everyone remembered. Still, while nearly every guest rehearsed appearances, Maya remained focused only on doing her job with quiet excellence, unaware that within the next few minutes the same people who barely acknowledged her existence would witness a moment so unexpected that it would leave an entire ballroom questioning everything they believed they understood about status, respect, and the woman they had dismissed as invisible. Maya continued moving gracefully between the banquet tables as though the whispered remarks had never reached her ears. Every polished glass she collected, every fresh drink she served, and every courteous smile she offered reflected years of quiet discipline rather than obligation. She understood that large rooms often revealed people's true character far more clearly than private conversations ever could. While some guests measured others by expensive watches, family names, or tailored suits, Maya had been raised to believe that genuine respect was demonstrated through consistent actions, especially when no one believed you deserved any in return. An elderly couple accepted fresh, sparkling water from her with sincere gratitude, quietly thanking her before returning to their conversation, but they were among the few exceptions. Most people barely noticed the employees who kept the evening running perfectly. To them, the staff simply blended into the polished marble floors, towering flower arrangements, and crystal chandeliers that decorated the magnificent ballroom. Near the center of the room, several influential guests gathered around a long display of imported wines, discussing international investments and upcoming business opportunities. One executive glanced toward Maya before lowering his voice just enough to remain impolite without appearing openly hostile. He remarked that prestigious families always hired people who knew how to remain invisible, drawing another wave of restrained laughter from those standing nearby. Maya calmly placed a fresh bottle onto the serving table without acknowledging the comment. Her steady composure somehow unsettled one woman who had expected at least a brief expression of embarrassment. Instead, Maya simply wished the group an enjoyable evening before continuing toward another section of the ballroom. Across the room, Ethan Kang watched everything while speaking with several longtime family associates. His attention repeatedly drifted toward the entrance where security personnel quietly adjusted their positions every few moments. Although he maintained the calm confidence expected of the head of the family, those closest to him recognized subtle signs of anticipation. His father rarely attended public events anymore, and every appearance carried symbolic importance that extended far beyond a simple family gathering. Senior advisors checked their watches. Household managers quietly confirmed final preparations through discreet earpieces. Even experienced bodyguards stood a little straighter than usual. The atmosphere slowly transformed from elegant celebration into respectful expectation. Soft conversations became quieter. The musicians adjusted the tempo of the string quartet to a slower, more formal arrangement that signaled an important arrival was approaching. Maya noticed the change immediately. Not because anyone had instructed her to stop working, but because the rhythm of the room itself had shifted. Glasses were set down more carefully. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations faded naturally into silence. She gently placed a silver tray onto a nearby service table before smoothing the front of her neatly pressed uniform. Around her, every employee instinctively turned toward the massive carved wooden doors leading into the grand ballroom. Outside, luxury vehicles had stopped arriving. Inside, hundreds of eyes focused on a single entrance. The enormous doors slowly opened with deliberate elegance, revealing Chairman Daniel Kang walking forward at an unhurried pace. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, his silver hair was neatly combed, and his calm expression carried the effortless authority of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to command respect. One by one, distinguished guests lowered their heads in greeting. Executives who controlled enormous companies stood silently. Political leaders paused their conversations without hesitation. Ethan stepped forward to welcome his father, while the entire ballroom remained almost completely still. Maya quietly lifted her eyes for the first clear look at the elderly man, and the instant she recognized his face, an unexpected feeling of familiarity passed across her expression so briefly that no one around her noticed it, yet something deep within her memory had unmistakably awakened. Chairman Daniel Kang acknowledged the room with a slight nod, accepting the respectful greetings offered by influential guests without lingering on any single face. Years of leadership had taught him to notice details that others overlooked, yet his expression revealed nothing as he walked beside Ethan through the center of the ballroom. The quiet confidence surrounding him seemed to slow time itself. Conversations had disappeared completely, replaced by an atmosphere so still that the faint melody from the string quartet seemed almost distant. Maya remained standing near the service table with both hands resting lightly in front of her, watching the elderly gentleman approach. She did not stare in curiosity like many of the guests. Instead, she studied him with the calm attention of someone trying to confirm a memory that had remained hidden for many years. A faint image surfaced in her mind, not clear enough to explain itself, but familiar enough to make her heart beat just a little faster. She remembered hearing an elderly Korean neighbor speak with the same quiet dignity when she was a little girl growing up in a modest neighborhood outside Seattle. He had patiently corrected her pronunciation whenever she practiced simple greetings after school, insisting that respect was carried not only by words but by intention. Maya had not spoken that dialect in years. In fact, she had almost forgotten she ever knew it. Yet standing there, watching Chairman Kang walk across the polished marble floor, those forgotten sounds returned as naturally as breathing. Ethan guided his father toward the head table where senior family members and honored guests were already waiting. Cameras were absent because privacy had always been a strict family rule, allowing every person in the ballroom to focus entirely on the moment unfolding before them. Several executives quietly exchanged relieved smiles now that the arrival had proceeded flawlessly. Others adjusted their jackets and resumed controlled breathing after holding themselves tense for several minutes. A woman who had mocked Maya earlier whispered that the evening could finally begin. Another guest commented that perfection had been maintained exactly as expected. Maya lowered her eyes respectfully for a brief moment before instinct quietly overcame careful thought. Without seeking attention, without stepping into the center of the room, and without realizing that complete silence allowed every word to travel clearly, she gently inclined her head and offered Chairman Kang a traditional greeting in an authentic Busan dialect. Her pronunciation was warm, respectful, and remarkably natural, carrying the subtle rhythm of someone who had learned it from genuine conversation rather than a classroom. The unfamiliar words floated gently through the silent ballroom. For one impossible second, no one moved. The musician stopped playing in the middle of a measure. Several guests froze with crystal glasses suspended halfway toward their lips. A server carrying a silver tray halted beside one of the marble columns. Ethan slowly turned his head toward Maya, surprised that one of the household staff had spoken at all during such a formal entrance. Chairman Kang took one more step before stopping completely. His calm expression changed almost imperceptibly as recognition replaced routine courtesy. His eyes searched Maya's face with growing attention, not as though he recognized her personally, but as though her voice had unlocked a memory carefully preserved somewhere deep within his heart. Every person in the ballroom sensed the shift immediately. No one understood what had just happened, yet everyone instinctively realized that the evening had taken an unexpected turn, and the answers they believed they already possessed were no longer enough to explain what they had just witnessed. The silence lingered so long that the faint sound of crystal settling against polished tables became unexpectedly loud. Chairman Daniel Kang remained completely still, his eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that erased every other person from the room. Ethan studied his father's face in quiet disbelief. He had witnessed countless negotiations, political meetings, and family ceremonies throughout his life, yet he had never seen the older man hesitate after receiving a greeting from anyone. Several senior advisors exchanged uncertain glances, wondering whether an unexpected breach of protocol had just occurred. Maya herself appeared equally surprised. The words had left her lips almost instinctively, and only after the final syllable faded into the quiet ballroom did she realize hundreds of people were staring directly at her. She lowered her gaze respectfully, believing she might have spoken out of turn. Her fingers tightened gently around the edge of her white apron, but her breathing remained calm. She had no intention of drawing attention to herself. She simply felt that greeting the elderly gentleman with the respect she had once been taught was the right thing to do. Chairman Kang slowly turned his body until he faced her. Completely. His expression softened in a way that Ethan had not seen since childhood. The sharp authority that normally surrounded him gave way to something quieter, something deeply personal. He searched Maya's face once more, then listened in his own memory to the echo of the Busan dialect she had spoken moments earlier. It sounded almost identical to another voice he had not heard in decades. For a brief instant, the grand ballroom disappeared from his thoughts, replaced by an old neighborhood, modest homes, narrow streets after summer rain, and a family whose kindness had never faded from his heart despite the passing years. Around the ballroom, uncertainty spread faster than conversation. No one dared whisper while Chairman Kang remained silent, yet every guest could sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. The woman who had mocked Maya only minutes earlier suddenly avoided looking in her direction. The businessman who had joked about the household staff quietly lowered his eyes toward the marble floor. Even experienced bodyguards exchanged restrained expressions of confusion without moving from their assigned positions. Ethan took one careful step toward his father, prepared to ask whether everything was all right, but he stopped when he noticed the older man's peaceful smile beginning to appear. It was not the formal smile reserved for honored guests or important partners. It was the warm smile of someone unexpectedly reunited with a treasured memory. Chairman Kang inhaled slowly before speaking in the same Busan dialect Maya had used. His voice was gentle, respectful, and filled with unmistakable gratitude. Although most of the guests could not understand the language, they immediately recognized the emotion behind it. Maya lifted her eyes in surprise as she understood every word. The elderly man was not questioning her. He was thanking her for preserving a greeting that had almost disappeared from his own daily life. Ethan looked from his father to Maya and back again, realizing that whatever connected these two people had nothing to do with wealth, social standing, or the carefully arranged hierarchy inside the ballroom. The room remained perfectly still as Chairman Kang took one slow step forward, leaving every guest holding their breath because instinct alone told them that the next thing he did would change the entire evening forever. Chairman Daniel Kang stopped less than 6 feet from Maya, and for another long moment neither of them spoke. Every person inside the ballroom watched with complete attention, waiting for an explanation that refused to arrive. Ethan felt the weight of hundreds of curious eyes shifting between his father and the quiet young maid who had somehow become the center of the evening without taking a single step toward the spotlight. Maya lowered her head again, believing that remaining respectful was the only appropriate response. She expected a polite acknowledgement before everyone returned to the banquet exactly as planned. Instead, Chairman Kang drew a slow breath and placed one hand over his heart. The movement was small, graceful, and completely unexpected. Before anyone could understand what he intended to do, the elderly man slowly inclined his upper body in a deep, deliberate bow toward Maya. It was not a casual nod. It was the kind of respectful bow reserved for someone whose dignity deserved genuine recognition. A wave of stunned silence swept across the ballroom. Several guests blinked as if they believed they had misunderstood what they had just seen. One executive instinctively removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes before looking again. The woman who had laughed at Maya only minutes earlier stood frozen with her mouth slightly open, unable to hide her disbelief. Even the musicians remained perfectly still, their instruments resting quietly in their hands as though they feared interrupting the extraordinary moment unfolding before them. Ethan had spent his entire life learning the customs his father considered sacred. He knew exactly what that gesture meant, and he also knew his father never offered it lightly. Respect was something Chairman Kang believed had to be earned through character rather than wealth or influence. Watching him bow before a young household employee overturned every expectation inside the room. Maya immediately looked overwhelmed. She stepped back half a pace and gently shook her head, clearly uncomfortable receiving such an honor. With sincere humility, she bowed respectfully in return, hoping to restore the balance she believed should exist between them. Chairman Kang straightened slowly, smiling with quiet warmth that reached his eyes. He spoke again in the Busan dialect, his voice calm and filled with appreciation. Maya listened carefully before answering in the same dialect with modesty and kindness. Although very few guests understood the language itself, everyone recognized that the exchange carried deep mutual respect rather than formality. Ethan noticed that his father's eyes had become noticeably brighter, almost as though an old burden had suddenly become lighter. The older man regarded Maya not as an employee serving drinks at an elegant banquet, but as someone connected to a memory he deeply treasured. Around the ballroom, whispers finally began to spread. Guests quietly asked one another who Maya really was. Some assumed she must secretly belong to an influential family. Others wondered whether she had once lived in South Korea. A few speculated that she had saved Chairman Kang's life many years earlier. None of the theories matched the quiet simplicity reflected on Maya's face. She neither accepted the attention with pride nor attempted to explain herself. She simply stood with the same calm composure she had displayed throughout the evening, while everyone else struggled to understand how a woman they had overlooked only moments before had become the one person capable of earning a gesture of respect that no amount of wealth could ever purchase. Murmurs spread through the ballroom with surprising speed, yet no one dared raise their voice above a respectful whisper while Chairman Daniel Kang remained standing before Maya. The carefully planned evening had drifted completely away from its formal schedule, replaced by a single unanswered question that occupied every mind in the room. Who was this quiet young woman, and why had one of the most respected men in the family shown her such extraordinary honor? Ethan maintained his composure, but years of observing his father's smallest expressions told him this moment had not been accidental. Chairman Kang never acted on impulse, especially in front of distinguished guests. Every gesture carried meaning, and tonight was no exception. Several senior advisors subtly approached Ethan, hoping for guidance, but he quietly signaled for everyone to remain where they were. Interrupting his father now would only deepen the mystery. Maya lowered her eyes once again, wishing the attention would pass as quickly as it had arrived. She had reported for work expecting nothing more than another evening of serving guests, replacing glasses, and making certain everyone felt welcome. Instead, hundreds of strangers were studying her as though she possessed some secret that even she did not fully understand. She searched her own memory, trying to recall why hearing Chairman Kang's voice had felt so familiar. The images remained incomplete, like scattered pieces of a photograph that had faded with time. She remembered a modest neighborhood, the comforting smell of homemade meals drifting from a nearby apartment, an elderly Korean gentleman who always smiled patiently, and long afternoons spent practicing simple greetings because he insisted that language was one of the purest ways to show respect. She had been a child then. She had never imagined those quiet lessons would matter decades later. Chairman Kang looked toward Ethan and spoke calmly in Korean before returning his attention to Maya. Ethan nodded politely, although his thoughtful expression revealed that he was processing every word carefully. Turning toward the guests, he offered a warm smile and thanked everyone for their patience, explaining only that an unexpected personal memory had resurfaced for his father. His explanation answered almost nothing, yet it reassured the room enough for people to breathe normally again. The musicians gently resumed playing, though their performance carried a softer tone than before, as if they also sensed they had become witnesses to something deeply meaningful. Guests slowly returned to quiet conversations, but the subject never changed. Every table speculated about Maya. Some believed she must have studied in South Korea. Others wondered whether her family had once worked closely with the Kang family. A few admitted they had misjudged her the moment she entered the ballroom. The earlier jokes suddenly felt uncomfortable even to the people who had laughed the loudest. One woman quietly set down her glass, replaying her own careless remarks in her mind with growing embarrassment. Maya noticed none of the whispers because she had already returned to her responsibilities. She picked up the same silver serving tray, checked that every table had fresh water, and thanked each guest with the same calm professionalism she had shown since the beginning of the evening. Nothing about her posture suggested pride or triumph. If anything, she seemed determined to become invisible once again. Watching from across the ballroom, Ethan realized that her quiet humility explained far more than any rumor ever could. Whatever connected his father to Maya, it was clearly rooted in values that could not be measured by titles, wealth, or reputation, and for the first time that evening he found himself wanting to uncover a forgotten story that had somehow remained hidden for many years. As dinner progressed, the elegant rhythm of the evening slowly returned, yet the atmosphere had changed in a way no carefully planned schedule could restore. Every conversation eventually circled back to the same quiet question, and every curious glance seemed to follow Maya wherever she walked. She remained focused on her responsibilities, carefully replacing serving utensils, refilling glasses, and thanking guests with the same gentle professionalism that had defined her entire evening. Nothing about her behavior suggested that she believed she had become important. If anything, she worked even more quietly than before, hoping not to interrupt the celebration any further. Ethan observed her from across the ballroom with growing curiosity. The respect his father had shown could not be explained by coincidence, and he knew better than anyone that Chairman Daniel Kang never allowed emotion alone to guide his public actions. Waiting until the musicians began another graceful performance, Ethan approached his father privately near one of the tall windows overlooking the illuminated gardens. Speaking softly, he asked the question everyone in the room wanted answered. Chairman Kang remained silent for several moments before smiling faintly. He admitted that he did not recognize Maya herself. Instead, he recognized something far older than a face. He recognized the exact bosom greeting, the careful pronunciation, and the quiet sincerity behind it. Very few people outside a small community had ever spoken those words with such natural warmth. The sound had carried him back more than 30 years to a difficult season early in his career when he had arrived in the United States knowing very little English and even fewer people. During those uncertain months, an African-American family living in the same neighborhood had welcomed him with extraordinary kindness despite having almost nothing themselves. They shared meals, encouraged him to practice English without embarrassment, and listened patiently while he taught them simple Korean greetings in return because they believed learning another person's culture was a sign of respect. One little girl became especially determined to pronounce every word correctly. She practiced after school almost every afternoon, laughing whenever she made mistakes until she finally mastered the greeting exactly as he remembered hearing it tonight. Chairman Kang quietly admitted that life eventually pulled everyone in different directions. Careers changed, neighborhoods disappeared, and contact was gradually lost. Yet he had never forgotten the generosity that family had shown a stranger during one of the loneliest chapters of his life. Ethan listened without interrupting, surprised that he had never heard the story before. His father explained that some debts could never be repaid with money because they were built upon simple human kindness offered without expecting anything in return. Looking toward Maya across the ballroom, he said he could still hear the same sincerity in her voice that had once filled a small neighborhood many years ago. Whether Maya remembered him or not mattered very little. The values she carried were unmistakably connected to the family that had changed his life. Ethan followed his father's gaze and watched Maya patiently help an elderly guest carry a dessert plate without realizing anyone was observing her. At that moment he understood that the remarkable bow had never been about social status or hidden influence. It had been a public expression of gratitude for a kindness that had survived the passing of decades, proving that genuine respect often travels farther through generations than anyone could ever imagine. By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere inside the Romano estate had transformed in ways no one could have predicted when the evening began. The polished smiles that had once carried quiet arrogance had softened into thoughtful reflection. Guests who had confidently measured people by appearance now found themselves watching Maya with genuine curiosity rather than casual dismissal. She, however, seemed completely unaware of the change surrounding her. She continued arranging fresh coffee service, replacing silverware, and thanking every guest with the same steady kindness she had shown from the moment the banquet started. Nothing about her voice suggested resentment. Nothing about her expression hinted that she wished anyone had treated her differently earlier that evening. Chairman Daniel Kang quietly observed her from the head table before asking one of the household managers to invite Maya over for a brief conversation after her current duties were finished. The request immediately captured Ethan's attention, although he allowed the moment to unfold naturally without interruption. When Maya approached, she greeted both men respectfully, her posture calm and professional. Chairman Kang smiled warmly before asking whether she remembered an elderly Korean neighbor from her childhood. Maya paused, surprised by the unexpected question. Slowly, fragments of forgotten memories returned. She remembered a gentleman who had lived alone only a few houses away from her family's apartment building. Her parents often invited him to community cookouts because they believed no one should celebrate holidays alone. Maya recalled helping carry groceries to his porch after school and laughing whenever he patiently corrected her Busan pronunciation while rewarding every successful attempt with homemade rice cakes. She smiled softly as those memories became clearer, admitting that she had often wondered what had happened to him after her family moved across the country. Chairman Kang nodded with quiet gratitude and explained that he had never forgotten those afternoons or the kindness her parents had shown when he was building a new life far from home. He told her that many successful people believed they reached their destination entirely through their own determination, but experience had taught him that every meaningful journey depended upon unexpected kindness from ordinary people. Her family had offered that kindness freely, asking for nothing in return, and the respect he showed earlier had been directed not only toward Maya but also toward the values her parents had passed down to her. Several nearby guests unintentionally overheard the conversation, and the story spread gently from table to table without exaggeration. The earlier assumptions dissolved almost instantly. The woman who had mocked Maya approached her with sincere humility, offering a quiet apology for judging someone she had never taken the time to know. The businessman who had laughed beside her also admitted that he had confused social position with personal worth. Maya accepted every apology with simple grace, never attempting to embarrass anyone or remind them of their earlier remarks. She merely thanked them for their kindness and returned to helping another guest who needed assistance. Ethan watched the exchange carefully and realized that his father's greatest lesson that evening had not been delivered through a speech. It had been demonstrated through a single respectful gesture that encouraged everyone in the ballroom to examine their own assumptions. One act of genuine gratitude had accomplished what status, influence, and wealth never could, quietly reminding every person present that character always reveals itself more clearly than appearances ever will. As the evening drew to a close, the grand ballroom slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, yet no one leaving the Romano estate carried home the same assumptions they had brought through its doors only a few hours earlier. Guests exchanged quiet farewells beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, but nearly every conversation reflected on the remarkable moment they had witnessed rather than the business discussions or elegant dinner that had filled the evening. Ethan accompanied his father toward the entrance while household employees completed the final preparations before closing the banquet. Before stepping outside, Chairman Daniel Kang paused one last time and turned back toward Maya, who was carefully arranging the last collection of serving trays with the same quiet dedication she had shown from the beginning of the event. He walked over once more, offering a warm smile that carried neither ceremony nor formality, only sincere appreciation. In a calm voice, he thanked her for reminding him that the greatest gifts in life often arrived through ordinary people whose kindness was easily overlooked. Maya answered with genuine humility, explaining that everything she had learned about respect came from her parents, who believed every person deserved dignity regardless of occupation, wealth, or background. She admitted she had never expected a simple greeting remembered from childhood to become the most unforgettable moment of her adult life. Chairman Kang nodded gently and replied that kindness never truly disappears. Sometimes it simply waits for the right moment to return. Ethan listened quietly, recognizing that the lesson his father shared was meant for him as much as anyone else. Leadership, he realized, was not measured only by influence or success. It was measured by the willingness to honor goodness wherever it appeared, even when others failed to notice it. Before leaving, Chairman Kang respectfully shook Maya's hand, thanking her once again for preserving a tradition that had carried precious memories across decades and continents. Maya watched the family depart before returning to help her co-workers clean the ballroom, refusing every special privilege quietly offered by the household manager. She insisted that everyone had worked equally hard to make the evening successful and wanted to finish her responsibilities alongside the rest of the staff. Her choice impressed those around her even more than the extraordinary attention she had received earlier. The employees who had worked beside her every day smiled with quiet pride, while several guests who had remained behind offered heartfelt words of appreciation before heading home. Long after the lights dimmed and the final vehicles disappeared beyond the estate gates, the story continued to travel from one conversation to another. Yet people no longer spoke about a powerful family or an elegant banquet. They spoke about a young woman whose quiet character had earned genuine respect without asking for recognition, and about an elderly leader who understood that gratitude should never be hidden simply because others might not expect it. In the years that followed, many guests remembered that evening whenever they met someone whose title seemed ordinary or whose work often went unnoticed. The image that stayed with them was never the luxury of the ballroom or the influence of the people inside it. It was the simple reminder that true greatness is revealed not by the way we are admired, but by the way we choose to honor the dignity of others, because genuine respect always sees what pride too often overlooks.